Women Up Radio, designed to facilitate women's empowerment, improve your career, develop your talents, incorporate your passions, achieve fulfillment and success.
Hello, this is Women Up Radio, supporting Empower Women. Today we're going to focus on Ireland and talk about the need for transformational conscious leadership to support gender equality and women's empowerment. I'm joined in the studio by my guest Bernadette Phillips, sociologist, social activist, broadcaster, radio presenter, poet and motivational speaker. So a very, very experienced woman in a lot of fields. Welcome to the programme, Bernadette.
Thank you very much. It's lovely to be with you, Anna.
I know you're very supportive and very much a trailblazer and pioneer for transformational and conscious leadership. So what do you think the potential impact of this is on gender equality and women's empowerment?
Oh, it has major impact. I suppose if we look at the whole sense of leadership, and I suppose all we have to do is look around the world every day to see the lack of it.
Yes.
In the effect of the decisions that are being made. And so in the sense of conscious leadership and transformational leadership, which really go hand in hand, it's looking at really how decisions are formed and how they are formed in respect of looking after people and people's issues and people's needs. So, of course, the whole area of equality comes directly alongside that. And that's something we as women are very familiar with, as in looking for the whole sense around equality around the world for a very, very long time. Yeah. So the sense of conscious decisions, how they are made, they're not just made to suit just the privileged few. They're not just made to work for just certain people at certain positions in the world, but they are there to facilitate everybody. Mm-hmm. So that is absolutely essential, and that's the difference. So we see that there's, of course, issues like accountability, issues like integrity, honesty, transparency. They all come alongside the sense of consciousness as well. And I suppose any of us that have an ear to what's happening in the world at the moment see that actually quite the opposite is happening in many cases.
Yes. So do you think that there's more transformational or conscious leadership in certain cultures and certain countries? I mean, do you think it's better developed in some? Is there a real difference?
That's a very interesting one, I suppose, to look at the comparative across different countries. I suppose we, in a certain arrogance, would say we in the Western world have a bigger handle on that. But I'm not sure, really. I mean, if you look at the simplicity of how people live in the countries around the world, and I suppose the key there is also simplicity, and it's all about community.
Yes.
And I think we've moved away very much in leadership sense and equality issues in community sense. I mean, once upon a time in Ireland, just to give an example, people had lived in extended families. They lived together. They lived in community. They didn't travel a great distance outside of that community, but they worked and had to in greater collaboration. Yes. And that was from children right up to senior citizens. But they all worked and helped each other. And this is something now that I think is sadly lacking. And I think if you look at other countries, perhaps far less wealthier countries in the world, we see that they still recognise that working together is how they survive. Yeah. So I think we in the Western world could really start to look again to those particular countries to see a great models of community. And I think often we try and impose our ways upon people in those particular parts of the world, rather than actually us beginning to learn again how we do community.
Yes, yeah. Actually, that makes me think of something that I find very interesting. It's a bit off track, but anyway. Thinking of Japan, I always think of Japan for two things. One, because of longevity, because I'm very interested in that.
Right.
They still have such enormous respect for their elders. And they very much take the advice and the experience of their elders, and they have that very, very strong community spirit, which I think that is wonderful. And I think us here in the West, we should definitely follow their example of looking at older people as still being capable of absolutely everything and leaders and, you know, a wonderful shining light for what we could be. But then now, on the other hand, when you think of women in Japan, it seems very much that if they've got a career, if they stop to have children, it's very difficult for them to go back to work at the same level, because there's a very strong feeling that once they've got children, they should stay at home and they should be a mother. And if they're not actually looking after things properly, then they're a bad mother, or, you know, therefore a bad woman. What do you feel about that? I mean, have you thought about that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I certainly don't think that's exclusive to Japan. In fact, I think if somebody was listening to you and they just turned on this particular conversation, they would be resonating with it.
Yes.
And women would be certainly all around the world. You know, in respect of, we think, well, yes, we facilitate women to return to work, but actually, you know, we don't. Women still have to, I suppose, operate with both things alongside each other, being a fan, being a mother, being a woman out there in the working place, and that doesn't matter which section of work you're in, that still applies. And of course, if you're, you know, a professional woman working, you know, a high pressure situation, that's equally challenging. So I think that argument is still something for major conversation all around the world. And I don't think it just applies to one particular country, one particular group of people, by the way.
Yep.
We think perhaps, again, we have cracked this one a bit, and we say, oh gosh, yes, and women back in, we facilitate women back in. But actually having the conversations that I have with women on a regular basis, and certainly bringing that into more conscious conversations, I still hear very, very similar responses about their struggle and the issues that arise every day for them as women who want to go back to work or are out there in the working world, and also our mothers.
Yes. Yeah.
So it's not just exclusive to one particular group of people. I think it's a conversation that deserves to be had. I suppose it comes back to that sense of again, we're looked on as in the reproductive side or in the nurturing side women. You know, society always, of course, likes to put everything into boxes, doesn't it, and categorize us. But, you know, to take that into the sense of the conscious leadership, which is the theme we're focusing on here, and I suppose us as women, as nurturers, as in a sense too, so that connection with feeling again. And I think that's the conversation we as women can have together, but I think we have to equally have it with men.
Yeah.
And, you know, if we just stay alongside each other having these conversations, then I think we're missing out on making the links and the connections as well. So I think we need to bring men into this conversation big time.
Yeah, definitely. And so what do you think is the impact of this on women's roles in corporate business or as entrepreneurs? Because I think that links very much with the interaction with men as well.
Yeah, well, I suppose we have to look at how men lead and women lead. And I think we lead differently in that sense, because women, as women, I think we relate to people. We connect to and I mean, I think this has been a big issue, because many women that I've spoken to, and the struggles of that, it's almost like I have to conform to this kind of leadership, but this isn't really how I want to lead. Okay, so this is the conversation that's had quite a lot, and therefore we have to continue to take those sense of nurturing in there, that sense of leading in how we relate to people. And if we're to make changes in the world, and I think us women can lead with this, we have to start building relationships again. And working with rather than against. And I think so often I see men leaders, you know, they like to analyze things. And you know, the left brain logic stuff, which is needed in a sense, but equally us as women with our wonderful right brain imagination and creativity need to be bringing those particular skills and talents far more to the fore in corporate business.
Yes.
And that's what we need to be doing consciously. And that's what we need to be doing in a transformational way. So as we're building those experiences, we're building those relationships alongside that. And I think that's key to being a good leader in the world.
Yeah. And are there any businesses or organizations or anything that you think do that particularly well, or any type of training groups to try and get that vision across? Because I agree exactly with what you're saying there, but I know I've met some resistance in companies about that, but then there's other companies that seem to be much more clued up, and I think a lot of it is to do with the way the CEO behaves, whether they're male or female, because if they're totally implicated, it tends to move down through the ranks. But do you know of any schemes that are particularly good for that?
Not schemes as such, not come to mind. I suppose we look at companies, and I suppose, I looked at, from the conscious leadership side of it, and I looked at that, and I know there's been changes around this, but I looked at the companies like Whole Foods. They had an interesting take on it, because John McKay's conscious leadership side was quite interesting, and I thought, that was being led alongside by a man, which I thought was quite interesting, and that always interests me to see when men are evolving in respect of having those kinds of conversations. But in relation to women's networks and developments, I think that's one area where this can really be nurtured. There's women doing amazing things around the world, and there's so many projects. My goodness me! We need a week to have this conversation. But so in that sense. But I suppose today, this conversation, would like to, as we are doing, joining the dots in respect of the sense of conscious leadership, transformational leadership, the impact that it has on women's equality and gender equality, and that we look again at where power lies and what we mean by that, and how we share that in society, and the responsibility that we have in building the relationships alongside that. And I think they're the kinds of schemes and conversations, initiatives that we need to be nurturing. And sadly, we don't see a lot of change happening in that respect, certainly at the higher ranking sense in corporate. It's very money driven, and sadly, that continues. However, I think it's very important not to be fatalistic about it.
Yes.
And therefore, what I do, and perhaps what you're doing, what we're doing right now in this conversation, is that we're creating a greater sense of awareness about the need for this, and the void that exists, and the void that this can fill. In a very nurturing, very flowing, very positive way. So, therein lies, I suppose, the change that we can create from there.
You are listening to Anna Letitia Cook at Women Up Radio.
And what do you think, if we go out of the corporate world and sort of expand into the world in general, how do you think women can influence greater transformational and conscious leadership? Because I think everything comes from the woman. Maybe it's sounding sexist, but normally it's the woman that brings up the children. So they have greater influence. And I think a lot of these things and ideas come from the way you are brought up as a child, and that then has a knock-on effect. So how do you think women can influence more of this in the world?
Oh, immensely. Absolutely. I suppose I challenge in the sense, we need to move away as well from it's just women bringing up the children.
Oh, I know, I agree. But
so that's the old sort of worldview of putting us again in the reproductive side of who we are. We need to be moving outside of, as women, we need to be moving outside of that conversation. Because the more that we sort of adhere to that and then take it from there, I think we're also running the risk. There's a danger of ostracizing the conversation with men as well. So I think we need to be having a closer look at that one. But of course, in respect of women, we are amazing people. What women do every day, and I say this to women's groups when I go, and they sort of look at me wide-eyed initially. And I say to them, okay, list everything you do. List everything you do. Let's get a whole skills bank here going in this room. And when people engage with it, women engage with that, they are absolutely astonished at what they do every day, which is basically, including themselves, taken for granted. This is simply what I do as a woman every day. But when you begin to unpack that, and you begin to name it, and you begin to realize that in this room right now, there's a skill base that could change the world. That's a great conversation to have. And we need to be starting with women to have that, so that they themselves are nurturing that sense and acknowledging it, recognizing it, and recognizing the power that comes alongside that. Because that's freedom. That's freedom in a real sense, from the personal sense of freedom, and how we transfer that across to the others that we interact with every day, including our children. And as we begin to nurture that, of course, we nurture that with the children as well, that are part and parcel of our lives every day. And therefore, that, of course, transfers itself out into the wider community, into the education system, which is a big issue for me about conscious education, and how that, of course, transfers itself out to the world of work and beyond. And so we can see that it starts again with ourselves acknowledging who we are and what we do, and the power that gives, the freedom that it gives within ourselves. And I suppose there's a great sense of self that runs alongside that, and value. And I think we talk about that sense of value, the value that we place on ourselves and what we do every day. And often we shy away of that as women. Men are far better at that. Far better. I'm good at this, or I'm good at this, or that. But as women, we shy away from that conversation, and I think that's a shame.
And I know you just mentioned conscious education. Do you think, because a lot of people, particularly the people who are probably listening to this, they'll think conscious education from the point of view of adult training and more training in business, etc. But do you think there's a way of improving conscious education right from school?
It has to be right from school. It has to be right from the moment a child steps in to the education system, right at the very beginning. And take it back into kindergarten, take it back to where the first interaction a child has with the wider community within an education context in this sense. And so how we consciously educate, because so often, and again, I address this across the Western world, because we really define people, or young people are defined by grades, by results, and by achievements in that sense. And that is a great shame, because we are losing sight of the individual in that. We're losing sight of the uniqueness, and the potential and the creativity of the individual. That's the kind of conscious education that I want to see nurtured, and I want to be part of introducing, and am, into the education system. And therefore, when we have that, of course, the sky is not even the limit, because that sense of the creative is unleashed. And I see that, Anna, when I work with groups of young people who come from academic systems, and they've never been asked about their creativity. They've never been asked to explore it. It's very sad. It's very sad. And they're sort of honed towards this academic world, and therefore this is what you do, and you go out into the world, and your work is a particular discipline or area, whatever. And we lose sight of the dreamers, the artists, the ones that make this world a better place. We lose sight of that in respect of trying to put them into boxes in academia. And so that's the kind of conscious education initiatives that I know are possible. I've been part of delivering some of them, which is great. And I see the change that it creates. And also it supports young people to begin to critically think again. We don't teach our young people in our education systems how to think critically anymore. We feed them. It's like this old mug job where the educator has all the knowledge, and the young people are just the recipients of the educator's knowledge. Well, I turn that completely on its head and ask the young people to engage in life and share their experiences and also be part of the answers that we need. And they have a lot to say when we do that. So to engage them in conscious education as active citizens and as global citizens. And I mean, what a difference it would make if those young people go out into the world of work from that place.
Yes.
You can just imagine the change that can make in the world of work.
Yeah, definitely. It would be so much more energized in every way, because you would have people sparking off ideas, sparking off interest, really generating passion. And I think a lot of the problem today, and I think it's in some countries more than others, depending on their education system, is to a certain extent, there's just a group of robots, because the way they've been taught is listen to the teacher, don't have any thoughts, don't disagree, just learn it like a parrot, regurgitate it. If you choose to follow a certain path, you're stuck on that path.
That's right.
They feel that you can't change. Thank God I'm come from a background where change and adaptability is really important, so I'm okay. But I've met a lot of countries where it doesn't have that mentality.
Sure.
And I think also with the leaders, they need to, rather than thinking what's going to give the leaders of companies I'm talking about, rather than thinking what's going to give them the greater profits, they need to nurture people's ideas, spontaneity and creativity, and let them follow their passions, because that actually in the long run is going to do everybody much more good, and it'll even have a positive impact on the bottom line at the end of it. So materially it's good for them as well, because normally that's what they're interested in. But you get such a better, more loyal, more implicated workforce when they can use their creative skills as well and feel free to have ideas. I mean, it just makes such a difference.
It makes all the difference. Yeah. And of course it does. I mean, it impacts, and I talk about that and looking at their why in business and that, but it's that new conscious shift in thinking that, of course, and I mean, it does increase productivity. It does increase bottom line. But what we're doing there is we're acknowledging the people first, and we recognise the dynamics in people. We recognise that relationships in that sense in people are always evolving. So people have always something new to share. And as we explore that with them every day, look, you and I are having this conversation now, we'll be different people by the end of this day, because we've had different experiences and interactions. We'll be different the next day. So if we're allowed that free thinking process, if we're given the opportunity to do that, then of course we are always nurturing the creative. And people from that place create amazing things, including amazing businesses. So it really, really is a win-win. You know, there is no losers when we operate consciously, right across the spectrum. But as I say, we start with conscious education, and then of course we move it out into conscious business, conscious leadership runs alongside that, and transformational leadership as well. And I think it would be just amazing to see us women, you know, really, really gathering our sense of self and going out there and really engaging in these conversations, because I think if we have to lead it, we have to lead it. And that's fine. That's absolutely fine. And if we have to, you know, take the rap, you know, so, oh, well, sometimes that's hard and it isn't, that doesn't matter. That we're passionate enough about our why we're doing it, that we're well able to go with the ebb and flow. And eventually, of course, you know, something with that level of power will be heard.
Yeah, exactly. And so how do you think, thinking about that, over the last 20 or 30 years, do you think there's been much change or advances in transformational and conscious leadership, and particularly regarding women's leadership roles?
It's a very interesting one, and I suppose I would love to say yes, there's great strides. The other side of me says no. To be very honest here. And again, I think, sometimes it concerns me that even if we have certain conversations, that it's like everything else. We can have talking shops about everything. And I say this, I go into business. Look, if we just leave this here with this great conversation and don't start implementing the change, well, then we've actually wasted each other's time here today.
Yes.
And So I think about the implementing of these kinds of conversations and seeing how this actually works in real terms. I think we're far slower at that, So the conversations, yes, more, and it's a bit like mindfulness and things like that, and the great conversation about people are using it very effectively. But there's so much conversation about everything, and rather than implementing it, using it, seeing where it goes from there. And I mean, if we want to take it in terms of measuring the change, that's great. We talk about measuring things in business, great. And if we want to bring it into our strategies, whatever. But we need to be doing it rather than just talking about it.
Why do you think people aren't doing it? Is it because they're scared? Because they're not familiar enough? Because there's blockages from various sources?
I think it's a combination of all of that. I think it's a combination of it. I think we're afraid of change as human beings. I think we run from change. When I set up my New Insights for Change, of course, for my business, it was that, to create the new insights.
Yes.
And so to engage people with that level of conversation. Fear comes up quite a lot, and rock the boat. And I mean, the old one, gosh, we've always done it like this, and it's worked. It was work for who? But that's something I hear quite a lot still, and I hear it from both men and women. Which is interesting. But fear of change, always fear of change. But however, there is a breakthrough, and there is people that are now taking the step forward. And that's very, very positive to see. And again, because I'm very passionate about having these conversations and taking people out of their comfort zones,
yes.
where we know life begins and beyond it. And that old cliche, but it works. And so it's great, because when I give a talk, I give a motivational talk, whatever, and it mightn't always come just directly from the room in questions or whatever, or responses, but you would always get it from email later, or you get somebody calling you and say, do you know what you were saying there? That really has impact. And therefore, for me, a change has already occurred. And therefore, this is what I intend to now begin to do here. And I mean, that's wonderful if you hear that from CEOs or you hear that from people in leadership positions, because like everything else, it does have a trickling down effect, as in the negative kind of leadership has the impact. And we know that, we see that every day. So that's really positive as well, but it's slow.
Yes.
And I think we have to be aware of that and say, well, that's okay. But the more, of course, that we engage in the conversation, the more it becomes into the mainstream. And, that's my vision.
Yeah. And, okay, so one last piece of advice. If you're speaking to women who actively want to increase their own conscious leadership and to help increase it around in their environment, what would you suggest they can do?
I'm back, I suppose, to where we were a few minutes ago in respect of beginning to acknowledge who they are.
Yeah.
And it starts from there. I suppose it's very quick to kind of run off and say, gosh, I need to be engaging with loads of other people on this. But that comes later. They need to be acknowledging who they are. They need to be looking at themselves in the mirror.
Yeah.
And congratulating themselves every day.
Yes.
And telling themselves how wonderful they are, because that's the truth of it. And it starts with that change, because unless we can look at ourselves in the eye and actually acknowledge that, well, then we are not going to be able to acknowledge that out there in the wider community. Yes. Or out in the world. And it's going to be conversation that's had, but it will mean very, very little at the end of the day. to the changes that we implement consciously in ourselves. And of course, consciousness is about everything. It's like taking being a little more conscious of the food that I eat, being a little bit more conscious of my environment, and that starts in my kitchen,
Yes.
what I bring in to what I fill my fridge with, so all of that, but it has to start with the self. Yes. And work from there. So when I talk to groups of women and I see the light bulbs come on in their eyes about that, I see the tears come in their eyes as well, yes. Because